Good morning, everybody. We have people who will be coming in from choir and other duties, and we have lots of options for coffee, tea, etc. over there. Hope you'll fill up your cup and come down and join us. Barb Resco is familiar to all of us. She preached last Sunday, for Pete's sake. I mean, this woman is so talented and very involved and very knowledgeable about the subject of trauma. Some of us last spring were really blessed. Something's going, there he's got it, okay. Barb talked to us last spring about trauma, and it really connected for me with kind of acknowledging what we've all been through in the last couple of years, as well as our individual personal history, and how you really, I mean, I think as she's going to talk, but I'm just kind of vamping right now while people come in and get a seat. But, you know, I think for Americans, sometimes it's...
Wait and see if it goes away.
Okay, can we make it go away?
I'll have to wait and see if it
goes. Oh, okay, okay.
Go back to the problem next week.
Okay, we're trying to get this online so people can... Okay, anyway, I think as Americans, we kind of tend to say, you know, we're pretty tough. You know, we don't like to complain a lot or think we've been through anything special. But, you know, when you really think about your own history, yay, success statement. You know, there's a lot to think about how you've adapted through your life and how trauma may have affected you, and it's certainly something to be aware of with others. I'm going to introduce Barb Resco, licensed independent social worker, involved in mental health treatment throughout her whole career, and presently at the medical college, helping with substance abuse treatments, I believe it. Barbara. And we usually end by noon. If you need to leave a little early because she's got a lot of material, you know, just feel free to do that when you need to. Barbara. Yay, Barbara.
Thank you. So hopefully we'll get all the technical difficulties worked out. So I know most of you guys know me. Some of you have probably even known me since I was a child. So I want to tell you a little bit about kind of how I came to working with trauma so much and why I think this is so important for everybody. I have been a social worker since 2009, and I started out working with children and families and going into people's homes and working with them, and I then transitioned to working with women in substance use and then all adults with substance use, and now I actually work in more of a preventative capacity in a program that addresses chronic pain to help people learn other ways to manage their physical pain and emotional pain without needing substances. So, and the thing that came to mind very early in my career that came to my awareness is the sort of underlying theme of trauma and how it impacts people so much and how we really didn't have a very good understanding of it probably until about 20 years ago, and it's still kind of seeping into the medical and mental health communities very slowly. So I joined the Lucas County Trauma Informed Care Coalition a few years ago, and their goal is to help bring this information to initially agencies and organizations that provided services for people struggling with mental health. And it's now kind of, we're trying to spread it into other like hospitals, other health services. But I see this as very important for the church because we provide some of the services and support that other agencies provide in maybe less formal ways. And I think we also need to acknowledge that there's been injury and trauma done by the church. So how do we become a more welcoming and understanding place to accept people and to help people feel comfortable when they're here with us? So that's why this is just very important to me. There's a lot, I could probably talk about this, you know, all afternoon if you guys want to hang out. but but I'm going to try to kind of distill out, and I took this up. This is a presentation created by the coalition, so has been geared a little bit more towards clinicians or people working in this field or administrators in the field of social work and social services. But I kind of went through, I tweaked it, I took some stuff out that wasn't maybe as necessary for us to think about today, and kind of geared it a little bit more towards thinking about this in the context of church and being Christians and what that means for us in the community. So, and I'm trying to not move too much because I know that can affect the microphone, but we'll see how I do. So this is the information about the Trauma Informed Care Coalition. So if you are interested in this or want to get information that you can take back to places of employment or anything like that, it's a great resource, and we do a lot of education and ongoing trying to spread this in the community. This is just a self-care alert. So we might bring up some hard things while I talk through this. I'm going to be talking about trauma and how it affects people, and this could trigger emotions in you. So I will not be offended if you need to stand up and step out. I also want to say that I will hang out for a little while afterwards, so if somebody does need to come up and say, hey, this really kind of stuck with me, I can kind of talk with you about, I can do a little in the moment service and help you to manage that. So we're going to start out with a little example. So let's imagine. I'm going to give you a little story, and then we're going to talk about it and see where it takes us. So K, and it's just an initial K, and this could be a male or female, so we're going to make this gender neutral. So however you want to picture it in your mind, picture it. K was driving to work on 475 one morning when a semi swerves close to them. They hit the brakes and swerve to avoid the truck. Unfortunately, the car runs into a patch of ice and they lose control of the car. They crash into the side rail. Traffic is stopped. The ambulance and police come. They are taken to the hospital to be looked over. Fortunately, they have only minor injuries, including bruises, stiff back, neck, and abrasions. The car is seriously damaged, and it is towed from the scene. Kay needs a car to get to work. They are worried whether their insurance company will cover the damages to the car or replace it. The insurance company says they need the report from the police before they can determine the payout, but also suggests that if it is determined that the accident is their fault, the insurance premiums will increase. Well, they have not given an answer about the payment for their car. They have given them a short-term rental. While Kay's body healed quickly, they are very anxious. Since the accident, they have had frequent anxiety attacks. They do not want to drive, and even thoughts of getting into a car as a passenger sends them into a full-blown panic. So they have called off sick at work. Their work was patient at first, but now has threatened to put them in discipline if they do not come in. Their friends have been calling and texting to see how they are. However, Kay has felt so overwhelmed that they have not responded. So, what do you believe that Kay's thoughts and feelings are about herself right now? And feel free to shout out. What do you think Kay's beliefs about herself are right now?
I would think she's a bad driver.
Probably.
Like, you think it was my fault?
Yeah, so self-doubt. Any other thoughts about themselves?
Worried about the future.
Worried about the future, yep.
Afraid to get in the car.
Yeah, afraid to get in the car. What do you think their thoughts are about others, about the people around them? How do they feel about the people around them?
They probably don't trust the people around them.
Yeah.
They couldn't trust the truck driver, and now they can't trust the insurance company if they paid to.
Yep, yeah. How do you think they feel about the world?
Fragile, pretty scared, pretty vulnerable in the world.
Yeah. And how do you think they might feel about the future? Worried. Yeah.
Job, car.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, I think this is very relatable. What has Kay lost? What has she lost in this experience? Confidence?
Security.
Security. Yeah.
Trust.
Right.
Right, yeah. So some of the other things is she's lost her car, so her transportation, a job, she may lose her job, or job security, independence, financial security, friends, and mental well-being. So this is just a one incident that happened one day on the way to work, you know? Are we seeing the whole picture of what else could be impacting Kay's responses to this situation? Like, are there other things that might be going on that might be impacting how she handles this?
What led up to before the accident?
Yeah, what led up to
What's
the...
going on and else is going on in her life?
Mm-hmm,
Exactly.
yeah.
And was she in a previous car accident? You know,
Yeah.
you don't know if that happened too.
Yeah. So, previous car accident, other traumas, a history of anxiety or depression, and maybe they're already financially unstable. So many people are living paycheck to paycheck or very close to it, you know, they might only have enough savings to cover a week or two, and, you know, so sometimes not even that. So there's a lot that's going on in a person when they are dealing with something like this. So we're going through this because I want to talk about what does a compassionate response look like. We never know someone's full story. All we see is what they choose to tell us, what their behaviors show us. This activity helps us to explore how experiences change our view of the world and the ways we interact in it. How might the person sitting in front of us be affected by their experiences and their trauma? So our learning objectives are what we call the 4 R's of the trauma-informed approach. We're going to understand SAMHSA's 6 principles about addressing trauma and resilience, and we're going to name 3 changes we would make in our work setting or our home or somewhere or in our church that might help to be more of a healing place.
Tell us what SAMHSA is.
SAMHSA is Substance Abuse and Mental Health. Oh, I'm so bad with these acronyms. It's the National Agency for Substance Abuse and Mental Health. I can't remember all of, we have too many acronyms, so. Yeah. Mental Health something association or some, yeah, sorry. I actually have it on notes in some of my other slide projections because I never remember that one. So the 4 R's, they are realize. So the widespread impact of trauma and understand its potential difficulties. This could create an engaging in our church and in our congregation. What might be some of the traumas of people who are already here or who are coming into our church that may make it difficult to participate in traditional ways? So we're going to talk what is trauma. This I covered in my previous presentation, but just to touch base so we all have a same understanding, a baseline to go from. Trauma it results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So it can be a lot of different things. I think initially when trauma became part of the vernacular of society, we thought of it in cases of, serious accidents, natural disasters, and military service. But it can happen in a lot of other, maybe less obvious ways. So another important thing to consider is the definition of recovery. This definition was developed by a group of individuals who had been diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse problems. They were asked by SAMHSA to develop a common definition and a set of principles for recovery. So recovery is a process of change which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their potential, their full potential. This also, we also might call this healing. And it's not always that we go back to how we were before the event. but we figure out how to move forward in the best way possible. So just a little bit more on recovery in the different areas. The health is an area that we look at, overcoming and managing any diseases physically and emotionally. Having a stable place to live helps contribute to recovery. Meaning and daily activities such as job, school, having a sense of purpose. And then community, having relationships, social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. Healing happens in relationships. You'll hear that a few times. So I'm gonna play you a brief video about resilience, just because I think it gives us a good picture.
I'm going to try to switch again. It might hiss a little bit, but we should get some sound.
Okay. Now my computer's being annoying.
Why do some people do well despite serious hardships? The science of resilience can help us find answers.
We define resilience as a good outcome in the face of adversity. The extent to which we can build capacities in all children early in their lives to be able to deal with whatever bumps in the road or major obstacles may be coming down the track. That's an investment in building strong human capital, healthy, productive adults.
Some children face more obstacles and adversity than others.
Like having a parent with a major mental illness, growing up in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged community, going to schools that are not good, being exposed to violence in the neighborhood or in the home.
But some children do well despite these significant obstacles.
Resilience is that ability or set of capacities for positive adaptation, allowing you to keep in balance.
We're talking about the kinds of capacities and skills and abilities that give people a sense of mastery and management of difficulty.
It's tempting to think about children as either having this resilient quality or not. But resilience is built over time, just as in parallel with how the architecture of the brain is built over time.
It's not just in the person. It's in the interaction between the person and the environment.
So we care about resilience for the same reason that we care about promoting healthy development, because in many respects it is the same. We are interested in promoting resilience in children so that, despite the odds, more and more children can grow up to be productive citizens.
Okay. Get back to my presentation disappeared. Sorry. Oop. Apparently I forgot to pause it.
Resilient.
Okay. I don't know why my presentation keeps disappearing off my laptop. Sometimes technology is just weird. Okay. So this is an opportunity to have a shift in thinking. Okay. I tried jumping ahead. Apparently it doesn't like me today.
I think there's a start at this slide.
Yeah, I
in the
probably.
menu.
So we're just reviewing really quick.
By the way, the acronym is Substance Abuse and Mental Health
Services
Administration.
Administration. Thank you. I couldn't remember the last two letters.
It was on the bottom of the slide.
Oh. I did that on purpose. Okay, so Resilience. It takes a shift in thinking to kind of consider resilience. So these factors, and the video was very focused on children, but I think it's important to remember that we can help create resilience in adults also. But having family support is a resiliency factor. So if your family is accepting and if something horrible happens, they don't tell you to just forget about it or push it aside. You know, they say, okay, let's deal with this, let's move forward. That's very important. Peer support, having friends who understand or try to understand what you're going through. Competence, so feeling that, I gotta scroll down to make sure I'm telling you the right thing. Being good at skills, so having things where they feel like they're good at something. So even if they might struggle academically, maybe they are great in music or art or something like that, and really helping them to focus on their strengths. Self-efficacy, so confidence in the ability to control your own motivation, to have control over your situation. Self-esteem, feeling a sense of worth to other people and to yourself. Connectedness, school, work, community, feeling connected to other people, that people care about you, that there's people you care about. Spiritual beliefs. There is a lot of evidence that having a belief in a higher power is related to more positive outcomes. So if we can encourage that in people, it's helpful. So recognize, so this is the second of the 4 R's. So once we realize the impact of trauma, we want to be able to recognize this. Like, we want to be able to say, okay, maybe this person is not trying to be a jerk. Maybe they're in a defensive mode. Maybe there's something going on in them that makes them respond in a certain way. So remember learning about the effects of trauma on people. And some of you may remember I talked about ACEs in my last presentation. That's Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It was started in the 90s by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente out in California, and they studied thousands of people, actually mostly educated and middle-class people, and they found 10 determinants that however many you answer yes to, those are each an ACE, things like parents with mental health or substance use issues, witnessing violence, parents being divorced, sexual assault, other things like that. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. Poverty. Being in those situations. Those are all things that are going to put you at a higher risk for physical and mental health issues. So because it actually changes how your body functions. We know that also that professionals, including clergy who work with individuals who have experienced trauma, can also be affected. They can burn out faster. They can experience compassion fatigue. They can experience secondary traumatic stress and what we call vicarious trauma. So that's things, and I think in the last few years, these are things that we all are becoming more aware of. If you think of all of the frontline essential workers in the hospitals and stuff, they are exhausted. They've been giving and not seeing a lot of relief. And, I work in a hospital setting, and I know there's frustration with people who, because a lot of the people who were in the hospitals were not vaccinated, and that made it harder for them to feel compassion. They still did their jobs, but, it made it harder because it felt like these people were not being compassionate towards their fellow human beings. So there's a lot that goes on. So I think remembering all that. People, I think, having a global pandemic is unprecedented in all of our lifetimes. I don't think anyone in here was alive in 1918. Which was the last time anything like this happened. And not even just the pandemic, but the social upheaval and all of those things. Those have created different types of trauma for people and made it, in some ways, made it more difficult for us to be compassionate towards each other. So, but I also and I actually, I didn't say this at the beginning, I also have an MDiv, as many of you know, that's part of why I like to preach. And I have a lot of pastor and clergy friends on my Facebook feed. I actually probably have more pastor and clergy friends than clergy friends in my Facebook feed. And it's been really hard to see them because many of them have left their churches. Many of them have had to stop being clergy because of the secondary trauma they've received and in their own trauma in dealing with this situation. So I think that's important to remember, that even though we may be called by God to do things, we're still human. So we want to look at how we are going to respond. So by using the knowledge that we have, by understanding this more, we're going to be able to respond in a healthier way. We're going to be able to, remind ourselves that, okay, maybe this person is really struggling right now. Maybe they have something going on in their lives that's making it hard for them to interact in an appropriate way. And I find that it even helps me at times. I'm a pretty patient person, but to understand, like, I have a kid who I love very much, but had stuff happen when they were a kid, and it comes up at times and affects how we interact with each other. And I have to remind myself sometimes that they had some experiences that I don't have. And also my kid has experiences that I will never have because they're a person of color. So, I have to remind myself of that sometimes when they're getting on my nerves, to say, okay. And I mean, they still get on my nerves, but but it helps as a parent, as a professional, it helps to think of those things. So using a trauma lens, that's kind of what we're striving to do. So how do we establish and provide a safe place? What helps people feel safe? Working in a mental health agency, we had to look at things in our agency that whether or not they helped people feel safe or might help cause people to feel judged. For a while, I worked at a community mental health agency that was kind of faith-based. It was kind of loosely faith-based. So they often had like crosses and stuff in there, and that probably wouldn't faze most of us. But if you think of somebody, especially maybe someone from like the LGBTQ community or something, that came into an agency and maybe saw a cross and their only experience with religion had been feeling excluded or told that they were somehow a sin or something like that. Imagine coming into a place where you're going to seek help and that you see that, like, you're going to automatically be more defensive. So just looking at what is our environment like, how is it welcoming? And you can't always, I also learned that there's things that will trigger people that you never would have thought might trigger or activate people's trauma. So it's about doing as much as you can to think ahead, but then also being compassionate if somebody does respond in a way that doesn't make sense to you. So, and I think we need to look at some of those things in our churches too, like what are ways we can make our church a welcoming place? Do we need to have an area that's quieter for people that might get overstimulated easier? Do we need to, be more considerate? Like when, I think this kind of happened naturally because of the pandemic, but we used to always hug or shake hands at the peace, but some people may not like that physical touch. So being more respectful, asking before we hug, asking before we shake hands. So, in some ways, I think the pandemic has helped us check some of our behaviors that we didn't think about before. Underlying question is what happened to you. Instead of what's wrong with that person, why are they acting crazy, what's happened to them? Why are they what led to these behaviors? Realizing that their actions, their behaviors, their adaptations to traumatic events, it's how they learned to survive previously. All behaviors have meaning. It may not be, all behaviors have meaning. They may have different weights to the meaning, but there's meaning behind them. So something that might seem kind of like somebody who doesn't make eye contact a lot when you talk to them, or they tend to step back, that's probably them trying to create safety for themselves. And it doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you or don't want to engage with you. Build on success. So when you see things that are working, keep doing it. Do more. And then, as I said before, healing happens in relationships. That's where people learn that they can be supported. I had an experience recently with a patient I was working with, and this person, I'm not going to tell you their story, but I want to say they've had a lot of people let them down in the past. They had a lot of experiences, even with professionals and agencies not following through on things they said they were going to do for them. And just by me making sure they had a bad experience, and I made sure they connected with somebody who they could tell that experience to and hopefully see some change happen. And that caused them to have helped them to have more trust in me and to know that there are people out there that will follow through and do what they say they're going to do. So, it takes building trust, and that wouldn't have happened without the relationship. You need that relationship. So I'm briefly going to go through SAMHSA's principles. I want to make sure I'm conscious of time. So SAMHSA has these 6 principles. Like I said, they are a guide for trauma-informed change process. These are more geared towards kind of a clinical or medical type setting, but I think we can think about them in a way that makes sense for the church. These were developed by national experts, including trauma survivors. We want to establish a common language and framework. It's value-based, and we want to look at it as a way of being moving forward. So those principles are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So some of these I'm just going to touch on briefly, others I might go into a little bit more. Safety, and this is an important thing because I think what helps people to feel safe is something that is different for everybody. So how many of us come to church each week saying to ourselves, I hope I get hurt today? It is important for everyone to feel safe when they come into our building. Throughout the church, staff and congregation, whether children or adults, what might help somebody to feel physically and psychologically safe? And it's not just about our space, but also about how we interact with people, how we communicate. Do we take time to listen when somebody does have a concern or a problem? Do personal interactions promote a sense of safety? And then who defines what is safety in the church? How do we define that? What is the best way to take everybody's voice into account and to make it happen in a way that's helpful for most people? And what changes might we need to make to address these safety concerns? Both physically, I think a lot of times we think of physical safety because frankly, if you work in a field like this, you have to think about liability. If I'm not at least taking certain precautions, then I could be held liable for something. But I think we need to go further and say what makes a person feel safe so they want to be here. These are just some questions. What would make staff feel physically safe and psychologically safe in our church? And staff are the office workers, staff is our clergy, staff is anyone. Do we make sure that they feel safe here? I know there's physical things. I know we have cameras and security stuff, so when people are here, we were talking yesterday about how kind of creepy it can be to be in the church by yourself. I don't know if anyone's experienced that. So what can help people feel safe who are working here, especially on those days when it's not full of people and it can be a little quiet and unsure? And then also when we are asking things of those people, are we helping them to feel safe? What would make the congregation feel physically safe and psychologically safe? What are things we can simply do in some of our practices that might make someone feel more secure to speak up if they are uncomfortable? Consider to yourself how well our church makes you and the people around you feel safe. So I would love it if we had 3 hours to have a great conversation about this, but this is just food for thought right now. Trustworthiness and transparency. So the goal of church as a whole, we want to build trust within our leadership and we want to build trust within our congregation. So what does it look like to be trustworthy and transparent? There's obviously things I know working in my field, there's things that you just can't, you would like to let everybody know because that might help them understand, but then you also have to respect confidentiality and the nature of what's going on. So sometimes things might happen that you don't always fully understand, but you need to trust that the people who are doing those things have the best intentions, which can be hard sometimes. Peer support. In the context of the church, I see peer support as about mutual respect for each other despite differences of opinion. It's about approaching each other as peers despite any socioeconomic status, seniority, anything that might make you consider you know more, and you may know more about a topic, but respect where that person is coming from. Look for ways to empower and support each other rather than maybe trying to get your way over, because there's might be limited funds or something like that. Look at how can everybody feel empowered and supported. Okay. Okay, it's not moving forward. Sorry, it just stalled on me. Okay. I'm sorry, my thing is freezing up. There we go. Collaboration and mutuality. So churches need to maximize collaboration and sharing of power with paid staff, with congregational leadership. We recognize that healing happens in relationships. And I say this to our church, and I say this for churches in general, because, like I said, I know a lot of clergy. I went through seminary. I heard a lot of the issues that face churches, and as we have to almost reimagine church sometimes, especially with all of the changes that have happened in the last few years. Everyone has a role to play. Empowerment, voice, and choice. Trauma often robs people of their control, their choice, having power over themselves. By truly living this principle, we can help people with healing by giving them back control. In order to be a trauma-informed church, individual strengths and experiences are recognized and built upon. The experience of having a voice and choice is validated, and we want to help people develop new skills. What are other ways we can interact and be positive? A church fosters beliefs in resilience through providing unconditional love and support. So what are ways that our church can be a place of resilience for people? Everyone is supported in developing self-advocacy and self-empowerment. And staff are the supporters of our mission and not necessarily just someone we pay to do a job. So remembering that they're all part of our mission. Another thing to keep into account, and I could probably again do a whole other presentation on this, cultural, historical, and gender issues. So influences on how an individual interprets and assigns meaning to their trauma. Someone in one situation might experience something, and another person can experience the exact same thing, and based on where they come from, it's going to feel very different. It significantly influences how people convey traumatic stress through behavior, emotions, and thinking. There's certain cultural and ethnic beliefs and practices that, it's not okay to seek mental health treatment. It's not okay to ask for help. But, just keep going, Stay calm and carry on. Is that the British thing? Sorry, Edwina's not here today.
Winston Churchill.
Oh, Winston Churchill, yeah. It affects what qualifies as a legitimate health concern, which symptoms warrant help with. So you'll see a lot of people, like I see a lot of people in my chronic pain program that, there's some of them, they react to everything, like everything is a health concern. And then there's other people who, they're like, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's like, well, I've had this pain for 40 years. It's always going to be here. I'm just going to keep doing stuff even though it might make my pain worse. So it's, you get both spectrums. And it can also provide strength and unique coping strategies. So exploring what are the strengths of some of these cultural, historical, and gender approaches. Just some things to keep in mind as we are thinking about this. Like I said, this could be a whole other presentation, is cultural trauma. What is cultural trauma? It occurs when members of as a collective feel they have been subjected to a horrendous event that leaves indelible marks upon their group consciousness, marking their memories forever and changing their future identity in fundamental and irrevocable ways. I mean, 9/11, that was a cultural trauma. You think like a lot of things are how life was pre 9/11, how life was after 9/11. COVID. We all talk like, oh yeah, pre-pandemic I could do this. I can't do this now. So those are cultural traumas. Historical trauma is multi-generational trauma experienced by a specific culture, racial, or ethnic group. So the Holocaust, did you say? Yeah, the Holocaust. So people who experience the Holocaust, the people who are Jewish, they have this certain historical trauma that others of us may know about but don't quite share. Slavery and oppression, Jim Crow laws, all of those things are historical trauma. And then also looking at the gender lens. When we ignore differences in gender, we tend on males because that is the dominant framework in society. So gender neutrality is really male-centered. So I don't want to get too much into this because this could turn into a whole other discussion. But there's a lot of things in our society were initially structured around white men. So we'll be honest about that. We've made a lot of progress, we've made some changes, but we still have more change to go. There's still a lot of ways where even in the last few years, there's things like I didn't even realize that was something that was developed like during Jim Crow times, certain sayings even that we say that we don't even think about where they came from, that really have that sort of undertone of being very male-centered. And I know a lot of wonderful men and who are very supportive, and so I'm not male bashing at all. I'm just saying this is how our society has developed, and if we're going to address it, we need to be open and honest about it. The shift in thinking is resist. So the last of the 4 R's is resist re-traumatizing. So we want to see what can we do to keep from re-traumatizing people. Like as a mental health practitioner, it used to be sort of the former, I don't want to say former, because some people still do this, and it's effective for some people. A lot of people initially to treat trauma, they did this sort of like almost exposure method where people had to tell their story over and over again until they desensitized to it, which for some people was very re-traumatizing. So luckily in the last 15, 20 years, there's been other methods of treating trauma that have come up where people don't necessarily have to relive all the details of their trauma over and over again. They can process the emotions and the beliefs that came out of those traumas without necessarily having to keep saying it over and over again and reliving it. So, so our role in that is how can we set up a place where we don't inadvertently re-traumatize people as much as possible. Like I said, there's always something that might activate or trigger somebody that never thought. I one time did a relaxation exercise in one of my substance use groups, and we were taught, and it had waves crashing in it, and I thought, okay, this is really relaxing. And then somebody said, well, this was triggering for me to think about, they had a problem with alcohol. This was triggering for me to think about because I used to go out on my patio, which was by a river or a lake or something, and drink alcohol. So that made, and like who would have thought that the sound of waves crashing, which most people find relaxing, would make them think about drinking. So there's times where you can't know, but then like when I heard that, I was like, as long as I was working with that person, I kept that in my mind. I'm like, okay, we won't use that particular relaxation music for a while. So, and then also on an individual basis, you help them look at, okay, how can we not let this activate you so much? So I'm gonna play another short video for you. We've got a few minutes, and then just go through something. So I just got a couple more slides. So this is, again, about, hang on. This is about something called the dignity model. I know what I did now, so I'll be able to get back to my PowerPoint slide quickly.
Barbara, one of the things which I think could be really important is to spend some minutes with people being able to ask questions too if we can't get the technology to work.
Okay, so here we go. All right, I'm not gonna play the video. I'll give you the link for it. But I'm going to talk about what the dignity model is. And this is just a way to approach things to keep in mind as we go through this. So, okay. Current slide. There we go. Okay. Acceptance of identity. So when we are treating somebody with dignity, we accept their identity, who they say they are. Inclusion, safety, acknowledgement. So acknowledging how they feel, what certain things mean to them. Recognition, fairness, benefit of the doubt. So when somebody does something that doesn't always make sense to you, assume that they're not acting in a malicious way and they're doing something that is just in their repertoire of how they survive. I'm not saying there aren't people who aren't malicious, but if we live in a world where we believe everyone is malicious, it makes life pretty stressful. Understanding, try to approach people with how can I understand what's going on with you. Independence, we want to respect people's choice and their independence and their ability to make their own decisions. And accountability, helping people see that there are consequences to things, but there are also ways that we can move through them. So I encourage you, this is this is called the Dignity Model, Honoring Dignity. It is by, okay. I will give you the resource in just a minute. So this is by Dr. Donna Hicks. So if you look up Dr. Donna Hicks, she has a TED Talk about the dignity model. So I encourage you to look at that.
Can we just entertain a few questions
Yes.
or comments?
Yes. So let me open this up to. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts right now that you want to share? And so we'll just leave and you can think about how can you be more trauma informed in the next week. So.
I'd like to. So there's a fine line between, do you know what happened to that person, and being compassionate. So you encounter an individual who is prickly, or there's a vibe coming off, and my natural reaction is avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone gently comes to me and says, oh, but remember, or did you know about their trauma, is that person violating, not HIPAA, but confidentiality in talking about and giving me that sensitivity? Because my natural reaction, if I'm getting negative vibes, I'm not going to try to break through and ask a person. That's just, I'm just going to ignore it. But if someone gives me that compassionate, tap on the shoulder, I'm going to be a little bit more open.
I think this is a really good question, thing to consider. I think it is how, what is your motivation for sharing something? What is your motivation for sharing someone else's story or somebody else's information? So obviously, I'm bound by HIPAA. So I'm very limited on what I can share about people I know and stuff like that. And it kind of carries over in my personal life that I just tend not to, unless I have somebody's permission. So, I would say that some of that falls on those individuals. So I think one of the things I like this to do is to help us because sometimes our initial reaction is to step back, to shut down, to not necessarily engage, is that hopefully we can sometimes pause and just say what happened to them in our minds. So it might just help make it a little easier to sort of continue to engage with somebody instead of, just thinking, okay, maybe there's something that happened. So be curious. And it can be, and it's hard. It's something you have to consciously do. You can't, I know a lot of us, it's not in our nature. And when we talk about this and make this realization, that's one thing, but to put it into practice is another. So a lot of it, and I don't think there's anything wrong if you have a good friend who's like, hey, remember, they might just be having a bad day, or they might, they had some stuff happen. I don't think that that's necessarily bad. I think some of it has to do with the motive. Obviously, if it's somebody being like, oh my God, did you hear this? What, oh my gosh, that's so, whatever, that's obviously not a healthy way. But if you see something like that and see someone who maybe backed off and got offended by something, and you know something going on with that other person, and you think it might help them to say, you don't even necessarily have to give details. You could just say, you know what, they have some stuff going on right now, so, just give them a little space or something like that. So I think that's something that we can keep in mind, because we do. Sometimes we know stuff because we've been privy to something without other people knowing. So we know that probably if if this person knew what was going on, they would understand. So, any other comments, questions, thoughts?
I noticed in a school setting, I was a counselor at a large school. I had about 300 counselees in any given year. Mm-hmm. And the kids that are really resilient, you never hear about it. Mm-hmm. They never show up in my office.
Yeah.
So there's that whole thing about resilience is very important.
Yeah, it is. The kids that have the resources and have the resiliency factors already in place often are not the kids that you hear about. Those are those kids like, oh yeah, my kid went to that school. Do you know them? It's like, no, because they weren't a problem, which is how it kind of was defined before. So I think that's a lot of where this came from, was really working with kids at first, is that a lot of kids would get labeled with these negative labels, and they would just see them as behavior problems and stuff, and not think about maybe they have some sensory issues, maybe they've had stuff happening at home that makes it hard for them to function.
I think two things have happened in the last 20 years that have inhibited all of this. The HIPAA Act has made it almost impossible to find out what's going on with friends and people in a hospital or other settings. Mm-hmm. And in employment areas, you can't ask questions anymore when you hire somebody. So how are you going to keep your workplace safe if you don't know what their background is? I think those two things have probably increased your workload. And I think we need to think about how to fix some of that stuff.
Some of that, I understand the logic behind a lot of the rules and laws that do that. It's tricky, because there's times when you hear something that is patently wrong. Like I was in a meeting one time and somebody brought up, a person who's not necessarily clinically trained brought up some information about a patient that as reflecting on how something that happened in our program, and it was not how that person had represented it, but me and the doctor who were in on that meeting, we had to just say, that's not everybody's experience. That's all we could say. We could go into detail about why this person might have had this particular experience, because that's HIPAA. So it is hard. It does make it makes it more challenging. But I think my personal opinion is the reasons kind of outweigh it, but there's ways where that's because you have to, it all kind of also goes back to consent, that you have to get people's permission to know their information, and if they want to let you in on something, they can. And I think for employers, most employers can run criminal background checks. So we at least generally know if somebody has any sort of criminal history. And we can't always know if they have other potential antisocial behaviors, if they haven't been arrested or had criminal history. So some of it does make things more complicated, but it's kind of that weighing out individual freedoms versus, which that could be a whole other conversation and ethical dilemma. So, but it is something to think about. It does make it more challenging. Sarah, you had.
I just wanted to say that I think one of the keys you brought on early on is that kind of healing happens in relationships. Mm-hmm. And that if you're really making relationships with people and you're asking them about themselves and you're hearing, then a lot of this gets worked out without rules, One of the things I remember hearing about the Holocaust is that, and trauma was the damage to the brain that happens for very young people and can lead to learning problems and is associated with criminality and all these sorts of things that are resulting. But that the opposite is true also, that one, a teacher, a church member, a Sunday school teacher, a aunt or uncle, a grandma, can reverse that and change that and promote that brain health and resiliency. The relationship is really
the relationship there is there's a lot of research that shows if a child who does have a lot of what we call risk factors has at least one positive adult influence in their life, there's it's some really high percentage that it helps influence the resiliency to have more positive outcomes. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's a lot.
It's a lot. I know this is some heavy stuff. If you need, if you do want to come and ask me questions one-on-one, feel free. I'm going to be up here shutting things down, and go enjoy the sunshine. The vitamin D will help improve your mood.